When I was a kid, one thing that was consistent that would excite me, a way I bonded with my dad, was reading quotes from people who were dead, people who had lived many lives before me and had a lot of wisdom to share. And it wasn't that I always understood the quotes, it was that the quotes always made me feel something. So, quotes have always been a way for me to connect with something that is greater than me. And Sophie and I have both been with our families for the last week or so, and there is a beauty to being home in your childhood home with your family that does transport you to a time that is more holistic of your full life, of something that is more purposeful. And when I think of life, I inherently think of death and how death is something that is inherently a part of life. And without death, there would be no life. So naturally, being home, I started looking up quotes about death and specifically around the question of how does the finite nature of life affect its value? And I found this beautiful quote from Irvine D. Yalom, who is a psychologist who's actually 93, and it is his birthday to the date of recording, which I thought was a funny time to find him. And the quote is, though the physicality of death destroys us, the idea of death may be what saves us. And when we're talking about death, there's so many different avenues in which we can talk about it through experience, through grief. But today, what I really want to connect with is how can us knowing the nature of life to be finite impact each moment of life that we have? Because inherently, we must understand that if life is finite, if it was going to come to an end, if it was only going from point A to point B, and that's our whole life, then of course, doesn't that make it even more valuable? Is it the argument of quality of life or quantity of years we've lived? Or is it how often we choose to live in each moment that we do live? And this is a topic that I've came accustomed to probably through dating Sophie. I think I've always had a fear of death, but I know we all do. But I think looking at it through this lens of really understanding how the finite level of life, of how that can bring us to more clarity, to more deepened experiences within life, and to ultimately live each moment as full as we possibly can. And I think it's worthy of discussion because I know it's going to make the audience feel a certain way. I know it's going to make me feel a certain way. And hopefully that feeling is something that does encourage you to live a little more deeply today.
It feels very timely for me that you bring this quote up or and bring this conversation up on the podcast today because it is something I have been deeply pondering as I've been home spending time with family in what feels like very intense situations. And this intensity that I've been experiencing, not just with family, but in all experiences in life, this feeling of almost every emotion happening at once. And sometimes the best way for me to connect with this feeling is listening to a song, listening to a melody that describes this feeling of recognizing that everything is fleeting, recognizing that everyone around you is fleeting in the nature of their existence. And with that comes really tuning in to what's happening and really tuning into what I'm experiencing. And it's interesting because when you choose to do that, when you choose to allow yourself to experience what's really happening, it can be really overwhelming. It can feel like waves of grief, of pain, of love, of joy, of excitement. It can feel like a wave of everything and nothing at the same time. And recently, I've just been thinking about how, in choosing to live a deep and meaningful life, that means I'm going to actually be living life. And when we're living, we're feeling. We're feeling what's happening at that dinner table. We're feeling the emotions that are there. We're recognizing that everyone we're interacting with is also going through life in that moment. There's no separation. It's a blimp of an eye, we're here. And how crazy is it that we are here with the people that we're here with? When you think about the statistic odds of that happening, of being born, and the statistics of sharing your life with the people you share it with, it's very special. It's very, 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 very meaningful. And I just see how that's been a lot for me to experience because everything feels fuller. And when everything feels fuller, it also means everything's on the table to experience.
Well, I enjoy listening to you kind of recount what it's like to live a deeper life because, I mean, there's so many years that I've lived where it never even crossed my mind, where I was going 100 miles an hour, and the last thing I was thinking to do was slow down and question my thoughts. Because I think the key to living a deeper life is one where you do question your thoughts, because it's so easy to live a life ran by what our thoughts are telling us. And if the thoughts had never been examined by us in this moment, then how can we know that they're based in reality? How do we know these thoughts aren't reliving an experience from 15, 20, 30 years ago? How can we know that? And maybe not examining these thoughts is a coping mechanism for not having to feel the difficulties that maybe we've experienced in our life. And we'd rather not examine these thoughts and let them continue to run our lives. But the risk that is ran with that, of never slowing down or never connecting with how we're feeling in the moment and just running on autopilot, is that we may have never actually lived in the present moment. I know how hard at points of my time that it's been, and even to this day at times, how hard it is to slow down. I was doing a workout this morning that's historically Pilates aerobic type of exercise, and she was talking about stretching and how she goes and how hard it is for her to slow down, and sometimes it feels very tedious and we undermine little stretching our wrists, moving our neck to the side. We undermine these because our society doesn't value the slowing down. And I think something that's important to note is that the slowing down, it does require a level of patience, a level of strength. And I think when we slow down, that's when we can question our thoughts. And when we do that, we can actually connect with how we're really feeling. And when we give way to how we're actually feeling, those thoughts that control us may actually subside and we deepen into the feeling of it, and we can actually show up in life how we want to show up, meaning we can actually experience it without this mind controlling us. And I think when we're brought back to the idea of the finite nature of life, and if that inherently affects its value, is you would think, yes, across the board, it does affect its value. But I don't think that that is for everyone, because I think ultimately the choice is up to everyone. I think there are inherent moments that do bring up life's finite value. A loved one passing away, a dog passing away, these things that remind us that life is finite. So I think everyone has these experiences that remind us. But I think the question is, are you experiencing this one at once every decade? Or are you experiencing this on a daily, weekly, monthly basis where you're allowing yourself to see the reality of what's around you and actually see life as finite, allowing you to increase the value of each moment of your life?
I feel like when I'm not seeing life as finite, I'm likely in a state of avoiding, I'm likely in a state of running away, of self sabotaging, of taking some sort of protective measure to protect myself from being here. I think life is really that simple. It's, are we here or are we not? And it's not so simple in the complexity of the emotions that we have to experience when we choose to be here. That's not the simple part. because we can't help that some experiences are very, very painful to be in. But what it comes down to is no longer running away from the pain and no longer running away from the feeling. When you ponder the question of how often are we choosing to recognize the fleeting nature of life, it's crazy to think about how it would be something that we only do once every 10 years, or that is only something that is brought to the surface when somebody passes away or when we're actually facing loss. But what I've been realizing, I think since I started taking psychedelics and going on retreats and living more and deep, meaningful life and connecting with this experience of existence on such a deep level is every single moment has so much potential to experience the richness of what's happening. Whether you are watching a ladybug crawl on your finger, or for me, yesterday I was sitting on the patio and a bee dropped like a little worm that fell, a little green worm, and fell onto me. If we're starting small from the intricacies and complexity of the ecosystem that our entire planet runs on and the functioning of all the different species, how that in and of itself is so beautiful. And we can start small. That there was a time in my life where I didn't even know that I was connected to that. I didn't even know. I'd watch nature documentaries and not be fazed by that awestruck feeling of watching a sunset or seeing a mountain covered with snow. And I think it starts there, but it becomes even more profound when it's no longer just the experiences you're having in nature, but it's experiences you're having in every moment. It's sitting at a table with friends you're catching up with, recognizing how much you all miss each other and how much your relationship to each other means. It's sitting at the dinner table with your family and realizing how much you love each other, no matter what you've been through. It's recognizing when you're at a restaurant and the chef is putting so much time and effort into the meal they're making, how much love there is. You start to see love in everything. Every single experience becomes a transcendent level of love. Where, for me personally, when I experience those moments, I'm okay that I won't be here one day. I'm okay with recognizing that because I feel so damn full and I feel so alive. And maybe the point of life was simply to let ourselves find out what it means to be alive. But if we're scared of that, we don't realize that the fear is just trying to keep us safe, but it's not helping us at all because that's not what we really want. It's keeping us protected from feeling love. But the walls and layers of pain and fear and grief that is between that feeling, it can feel like a life's work. But what I've learned that when you let go and you let yourself be in the experience, the walls fall down naturally and beautifully. And you realize that the walls were never inherent in the experience. They were just the walls you were creating. And every experience, just to tie this up and what you were saying, Daisy, every single experience has inherent meaning. And it's up to us of how much do we want to allow ourselves to tap into that. And yes, of course, that's correlated with how raw we're going to feel. And the more raw we're feeling, the more intense it's going to be. But that's when I personally am the most relaxed. That's where it feels like I'm here and there's nowhere else for me to be.
Well, I think exactly with what you just said, of when things in your life do feel intense, that you're okay with it because it means you're here. And something I have to reference is that pain reminds us of something. Pain is always reminding us of something, and it's that we're here. And I will say, like, I get my period, and it it sounds funny to say it like that, but there is something that is beautiful about how when you do get your period, like, and you have cramps or you have like these things that you just inherently experience, it brings you to the pain of it, it brings you here. It always, snaps me back, and I always am feeling more deeply in that experience, and it helps me realize things I've been neglecting. It helps me realize things that I have not been paying attention to or things that I need to pay attention to for my body. It all comes up at that point, which I think is a beautiful way to look at that period of your month. But you said a lot of things there, and there's so many different ways I can reply. But one of the things that inherently sticks out is that you were referencing just nature and how insane that we get to experience nature and how that is a huge testament to how we can be reminded of the finite value and nature of life is by watching nature. But, the more tuned in we become to the experience we're having right now, the more the things that used to not even catch our attention are things that we've taken for granted, are things now that can, deeply move me. Like, for example, being in a yard where there's a lot of trees and there's a lot of grass. I kinda can't believe that there's these little chipmunks and squirrels running around, and, I watch the birds, and they fight at each other, they feed each other with their little beaks, they're eating the little seeds that are in the grass. The woodpeckers are pecking the wood to try and get the little insects that are within the bark. I could watch it for hours because it's something that makes me feel alive. I think it's beautiful, and on that note, I think something that I've really recognized is that my entire life, and this is maybe, of course, a part of the way we're brought up, the way that we're brought up within, a functioning society, is that we're so reminded that we have to work to make money, and we have to make a life, and we have to be able to live on our own, and we have to be able to build a life for ourselves, and we have to be responsible, and of course that makes sense. But so much attention my whole life went into that I never paid attention to the arts, the hobbies, the slowing down, the beauties of life. And I think that it is common to put all of our attention into work. But I feel like for the first time, I'm learning what it means to, as my work converges with the things that I love, I'm also seeing the importance of just doing things for the fact of doing them because they're fun. Reading a book because it's a fun title. Reading a book because it calls you, not because you're trying to learn something specific from it, but knowing that you'll take something away from it, whether it's impactful or just an enjoyable experience. And it makes me, of course, think of the line from the movie Dead Poet Society, where the teacher, the English teacher, is teaching a prep school of boys, and they're all fixated on becoming doctors and lawyers. And he says, these are all noble professions, but the reason we live is to express. We live and create meaning through the arts. We live and create meaning through writing poetry, through writing stories. Like, this is what keeps us alive when we're going through a breakup or we're going through grief and a death. It's the human experience portrayed through the experience of one person. And that makes us feel less alone. And that is so beautiful because that is true. I mean, and of course, and thinking of how our society overvalues work, it's like, well, where's the balance? But I think that scene depicted it so perfectly because sure, we can work really hard and we can create a life that way, but what about the experience of life? What about enjoying it? What about slowing down and being able to see it for what it is? What happens when we don't do that? And that really ties in, right? If you know you're going to die, if you know that life is fleeting, in order to slow down and enjoy the fleeting moments of life, we have to be able to slow down. And oftentimes we're rewarded for speeding up and not slowing down. So it's something that we have to take accountability for ourselves because no one is going to tell us to enjoy our life. Other people profit from us working hard and finding our value in working 12 hours a day. This is something that we have to carve out and find for ourselves. We have to find meaning and purpose for ourselves. And that is interpreted however you like. But I'm just amazed at how many books there are with so many expression. It's impossible to read every book there's ever been made. But reading is truly a reminder that there's so much beauty and there's so much different expression of the beauty that we all experience. And we all deserve to slow down and to appreciate that beauty in any way that we can.
When I'm sitting outside watching the birds or enjoying the breeze of the wind, I'm not wondering what anyone else is doing. I'm not thinking and comparing my experience to Joe Smo, whose Instagram story I was watching 2 days ago. Like, it was not until recently where I have learned how to enjoy. And I think that is a very interesting thing about life. It's intuitive, our ability to enjoy. I often feel much like a child when I'm outside as of late. And that feeling, it feels like it feels so familiar. It feels like home. It feels like that's it. That is where I am meant to be. And I think somewhere along the journey, we get disconnected from that. We forget. We forget that we can come home to ourselves. We forget that we can come back to ourselves and we can come back to the presence of this moment and all of all that is happening. And I bring that up because I think the initial, and I say initial, but I think this journey is one where you're deepening, but you're kind of always going in circles because when everything's on the table, right now I could decide to stop appreciating and go back to thinking about myself and go back to distracting myself. They are decisions we make. And I think the period of time where say you're going from living a very disconnected life to questioning things and becoming more aware, trust yourself as you go through that process. Trust yourself as you go through the discomfort of going on a walk alone in the forest. Know that the discomfort you're experiencing, the unfamiliarity you are experiencing, the fear you're experiencing will subside. And when it does, you're left with a feeling that was never meant to be scary. It was just how far we've ran away from ourselves, how much effort we've put to run and run and run and run. So give yourself some compassion. Give yourself a level of, okay, there's no right way to do this. There's no wrong way to do this. But I think what matters is really honoring the time that you take with yourself and dedicating that, as to me, it feels sacred. It feels like otherwise I'm denying myself from being with my being. How silly is that? That we have one chance in this vessel and I want to get to know it. So it feels really refreshing to, after going through so much back and forth of thinking about other people for so long and feeling confused about this lifestyle I want to live of being closer to nature and not being in the grind and having a slower life, to continuously come back and deepen this understanding where it no longer is a question. It's no longer a, but how about this route? It's, this is home. And that is the feeling I'm going to follow. And I think when we start following an inner knowing, we will never get lost because our inner compass can always be recalibrated. We have to just give ourselves some time and space to let it do so.
I've heard you use the word fear several times. So I have to reference this very, 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 I feel like relevant quote that is very well known by Marcus Aurelius. It's not the death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live. So we all have that inner knowing. And Sophie, the inner knowing that you want to live in nature. I agree. I feel like this is something that I've always had as well. but I've always pushed it down because I've thought, "You don't deserve that. You need to work really hard. You need to be around people who are working really hard." And of course, these are just our thoughts that, again, we can question them. And the more we question them, the more we get back into how we're feeling, the more we can just experience what is actually here. There's no right or wrong way to do something. There's just the action that we take. And the more inaction we take, the more fear we actually have to actually live. And I mean, that's another thing. It can be very fearful to live. We can be afraid to live and we can die without actually living. And what does that mean? And I think for me, that just inherently is so attached to living true to yourself. And what does living true to yourself mean? It means allowing yourself to feel. I think that is the case. And that's not to say not everyone's doing their best. Everyone has their own way of expression, everyone has their own way of showing love. And I think everyone is to be met with where they're at with the way that they show love. But I think being able to allow yourself to feel is a great act of rebellion because our minds don't want us to do that. And it's I when I say an act of rebellion, it's like a rebellion to our minds because our minds can make us think that the nature of life is not finite. It can make us think that, you know, since the store was out of your favorite flavor of poppy, that your day's ruined. And it's all the perspective that we choose to have. And I think that's where, for me, always reading quotes of famous people of the past or reading great literature or reading lyrics and listening to lyrics, it's like these or the things that not help us tap into the mind necessarily, but they help us tap into the feeling. And I hope that's what this podcast does. And something I wanna read, and if you're listening to this podcast at the time of release, then I'm sure you've heard the song Pink Skies by Zach Bryan. And of course, I wanna read a few lyrics from the song because I think the inherent nature of life and how it's fleeting is something that allows us to capture it, bookend it, and put it into art so well. Put it into a feeling so well because it is fleeting. And I think things that are fleeting, there is a feeling to them that we cannot explain by words. And it's beautiful to watch and to listen and to see and to read the expression of those who attempt to put that feeling into words and very much succeed at it by eliciting a feeling that comes from it. So this song is by Zach Bryan and it's Pink Skies. And a few of the lyrics I think just really encapsulate the experience of someone dying and the fleeting nature of our own experience. I think it does a good job of that. And it says, "So clean the house, clean the drawers, mop the floors, stand tall, like no one's ever been here before or at all. And don't you mention all the inches that are scraped on the door frame. We all know you tiptoed up to 4-1 back in '08. If you could see him now, you'd be proud, but you'd think they's yuppies. Your funeral was beautiful. I bet God heard you coming." And I think what I take away from like the things that we feel most from are the things that feel most personal. Like the details of that lyric of, you know, you tiptoed and you tried to act taller when your mom or your dad, your grandpa was trying to measure you on the wall that no one will ever paint over. That's an experience we can all relate to because it's such an intimate one. And that to me reflects how the intimate experiences are what make life meaningful and purposeful of you're so present in that moment where you're trying to be a little taller. Like those I think there's just something about encapsulating what a memory and attaching it to someone's death. It's almost like a death is what allows us to appreciate those little moments that make us reflect on those little moments that make up our life because those moments are what make up our life. And I think that's what makes art so beautiful is that it's a reflection of moments of experiences of little pieces of our life or little feelings of our life. It's trying to encapsulate the human condition. Poems, songs, books. They're all trying to encapsulate something that none of us can grab because it's fleeting. And I think that is beautiful because no one can grab it. So we all try to create an expression that is meaningful, that gives us purpose, that we really find meaning in, and that helps others find meaning in it as well. Because ultimately, within feeling, there is meaning because it means we're here. It means we are actually experiencing what is in front of us. And I love that song. I just think it's a beautiful song. It really just makes you feel nostalgic. And I love referencing beautiful things that encapsulate a feeling because isn't that what gives life purpose and meaning? Is trying to do that?
As you're talking, I was watching this little green bug crawl on the window and I just started laughing. And recently I've been feeling that way watching the birds. Like everything makes me smile. And that doesn't mean that can come off like, oh, I'm always happy. Like, no, it doesn't mean that. It means you see life everywhere and you feel life everywhere and you hear it in the songs and that song by Zach Bryan and a lot of his music. And it's the very nuanced nature of each individual life that we have and how there's a lot of overlap with everyone who lives and these childhood experiences we have and what it feels like to be young and what it feels like to be getting older and not know. And connection is it to me. It is the point of this all is to connect with other people, to connect with myself, to connect with the trees, to it's so profound, really. And I think this has been a beautiful conversation. It definitely tapped me into feeling which I have been feeling and I think a beautiful reminder of slowing down, letting your intuition guide you and letting yourself feel what it means to live even when that's scary. Thank you to this life. Thank you to the forces that allow this planet to function, allow all of us to be here, allow us to this entire ecosystem. It's magnificent. I struggle to say that word, magnificent. There we go. And I feel really grateful to have a place where I'm expressing and it just feels right. And that feeling of feeling right, you'll know when you feel it. So don't give up. Don't stop pushing forward. Don't stop trusting yourself because even if it feels really scary, that's never the end. Beauty is always on the other side.
Now that this conversation has came to a close, I would love to leave you with the same quote that we began the episode with and see if it means something different to you now. And that quote is, though the physicality of death destroys us, the idea of death may save us. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and we will see you next time.